Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Coffee and Conversation. Please grab a seat. Oops. Okay. So this event is hybrid. So thank you for being here in person. It's so good to see people and to be able to interact and network. We'll have time to network a little bit afterwards as well. So glad you're here. We're also virtual. So we have quite a few people online that are listening in. They may be asking questions through the chat box, so we might hit you up with questions from depending on what comes through. A couple slides to start. We're at the Sandbox in Paso Robles. We have an SBDC outreach center here, which means that we are happy to meet with business owners. We offer a no-cost service. We're sponsored by the SBA, by GoBiz, by the county, by the city, by Cal Poly. Lots of funding. We pay our consultants to meet with business owners one-on-one to help you accomplish goals that you need to set for like 3, 6, 12 months. If there's things that you're working on, we have amazing coaches, amazing consultants that can help you in all areas of expertise, be it if you need to build out financial projections, digital marketing, figuring out how to build up your sales pipeline. We even have engineers, mechanical engineers, if you're prototyping. So we have access to some really brilliant experts who can help. So that's my little plug-in for the SBDC. Thank you to our sponsors. As I mentioned, we're sponsored by the SBA and by the state GoBiz office. And we have a quick message from one of our private sponsors, Maynard Cooper, a law firm based in San Francisco that offer business support. We'll hear the message from the sponsors. Just a quick minute.
Hi, everyone. My name is Jamal Al-Haj, and I'm a partner with Maynard Cooper & Gale in the firm's San Francisco office. Maynard Cooper is a full-service law firm of national reach with over 300 lawyers across 11 offices coast to coast. Our San Francisco practice focuses on advising emerging growth companies and venture capital firms, including with respect to equity management, financings, employment, and intellectual property matters. We are extremely proud to be a Founders Circle sponsor amongst an extraordinary circle of other dedicated philanthropists who recognize the immense value that Cal Poly's Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship bring to the SLO community. We hope that each of you enjoys this upcoming training and workshop and are able to incorporate the knowledge and know-how that will be presented shortly to further help grow, develop, and accelerate your businesses.
Okay, and now to the only thing that matters this morning. David Walker, co-founder of Firestone Brew. So what's the exact name of the business? Firestone
Walker Brewing Company.
Firestone Walker Brewing Company. Thank you for being with us this morning. So we're going to launch right in. I'm going to ask David to give us a bit of a history of how the business started, the roller coaster journey, all the way through to taking on a majority investor, I think in 2015. Really interested to hear more about how that process happened and how it played out. We have a lot of startups that have investors involved in their business, and understanding the long-term play of how that plays out. But good morning, and thank you for being here.
Yeah, pleasure. Thank you. Thanks for coming. So yeah, actually, probably a good start would be to
should we start with a video?
Play a little video of who we are and where we come from. So
thank you.
You know, one of the first things I discovered after meeting Adam was that we actually shared a passion for great beer, hard work, and building stuff. Pretty soon we were talking about brewing our own beer in our own brewery.
We're the Firestone Walker Brewing Company.
Ours was the classic startup. The little brewery was hard on the eyes, but all that mattered to us was the beer. Like all good partnerships, David and I butted heads over the years.
I brought the great tradition of English ale. Hold on. No!
But the notion of pursuing the perfect beer was a guiding principle, and that's something we'd never wavered on.
When Matt Brynelson walked into our lives, that was actually a turning point for the beer. Perfect brewmaster at the perfect time. And we've brewed some really special beers over the years, and I like to say that we have helped define craft beer. And there's nothing more gratifying than that, and seeing someone enjoy what you've made.
In time, the beer takes on the fingerprints of the people who brew it and the place it comes from. We've built a family, and that's what we're most proud of.
It's hard to fathom just how far we've come. You know, we're 25 years in now, yet in so many ways, we're just getting started.
Okay. So that's the reason why we build businesses, is so we can have nice sort of soppy infomercials like that and make us feel great. But really, you know, there's a lot of truth to that. You know, we built something we're very proud of, and created a community and made a lot of friends along the way, and done something that, you know, makes us and others smile. So really, in all of the goals that you have in terms of building a business, actually, that's ultimately the most satisfying, is sort of reaching that point, and we strive to stay there. But let me give you a little background as to who we are, where we came from. You know, we're a classic family business. My partner Adam Firestone and I are brothers-in-law. 30 years ago, he was running 25 years ago, he was running a third-generation family winery. I was growing grapes and had a small tech business in the Bay Area. We sort of fell in with each other. We both had sort of an artisanal bias, sort of a closet respect for Willy Wonka and building stuff. And we both sort of had a sort of a belief in honest family enterprise. You know, I like to say that you know, there's only 3 types of entities that will fund capital-intensive, loss-making ventures for long periods. It's governments, fools, and families. And so, you know, we had a belief in that. And then lastly, we both were super, super passionate about beer, which was sort of mildly counterproductive considering our vicinity to the wine industry. So, so we actually went to the family and said, hey, how about making some beer? And they said, nah, not that interested. Wine business is pretty tough. So we created the Firestone Walker Brewing Company, and literally started our own brewery as more of a passion project. You know, we both had day jobs, suburban full of kids each, mortgages, so we couldn't just sort of throw it all in and start brewing beer. So we sort of moonlighted a little for a handful of years, and started to brew our, you know, brew the beers that we dreamed of. And you know, when we first set out, we set out a business plan to brew about 10,000 barrels of beer. It'd be about a $2 million business. Have a place where we could take our friends at weekends, drink beer, have beer that we loved, and that really was the dream. But you know, that soon became pretty apparent how difficult that was when we started, because it was really difficult to build a production brewery. A lot of really practical, empirical problems. You know, simple things like there was no equipment for brewers of our size. You know, there were home brewing equipment, and then there was big brewing equipment. There's nowhere in the middle. So we literally had to make that equipment. There were no people out there who worked for small breweries. You know, people worked in the wine industry for big brewers. There were medical school dropouts who liked microbiology, but there was no one who lived in this space of small brewing. You know, there was no raw materials. I mean, you'd have to buy your raw materials from homebrew shops at essentially retail prices. It was, and then you'd have to compete in the market at commercial prices. So the model was completely screwed up. And then lastly, there was no route to market. Even if you managed to do all that stuff and you could actually produce the beer, you know, the alcohol business in America is regulated. Stakeholders manipulate that, obviously, to represent their stakes. And so, for instance, as a small brewer, we couldn't just go sell our beer to a store. We had to go to a wholesaler. Those wholesalers, in turn, were sort of under the sort of spell of the large brewers who were basically dominating 90% of their sales. So they said, we want 100% share of your mind. Don't develop other brands. You need a craft beer brand, Budweiser will give it to you. We'll just slam a label on some lager, throw some hops in it, and call it Daddy's Brew. And so that was, all of those things were huge issues for us. But really the biggest issue for us, I think, as a brewer, because, we sort of piled through that. We slowly but surely figured those problems out. But probably the biggest issue for us, and with any disruptive space like this, was it what I like to call it indifference. The consumer really didn't care about us. In fact, I would make it, it's not hyperbole, I don't even think they cared about beer. I think they drank beer, but they really didn't care about it. And the big brewers had sort of distilled the narrative down to sort of refreshment and good times, frogs and bikinis, football and cheap prices. And so, for us coming in talking about provenance and raw materials and tradition and experimentation and brew your own and local and fresh, that was alien to the consumer. And let me give you a great little example. We have a tavern about 3 miles away from our first brewery, which was in the Santa Ynez Valley, and it had 4 tap handles on the bar, and had Bud, Miller, Coors. They were all separate companies at the time, and then it had an import, which was an Australian beer. And so we trundled down there and said, listen, we're making this beautiful beer. It's called DBA. This is an English pale ale. We Burtonized the water to mimic the water of Burton, the Burton Union of the Burton upon Trent. We use British malts. We use English hops. We use a London ale yeast. We ferment this beer in 60-gallon clean American oak barrels for 5 days. We then blend it back with, it was the story. It wrapped up the hopes and dreams that we had when we wanted to start our brew. It was a beautiful beer. It still is. Anyway, so we toddled down to this tavern with this beer, and the guy sort of looks at us. He says, it's a great beer, but I really like this import here, this Australian beer. It's Australian. People love the fact it's from Australia. And so after about 2 or 3 visits, I said, look, back up a second. I said, the beer isn't from Australia. That beer, although once upon a time it was started by 2 Americans in Australia in the mid-1800s, it's been owned by 8 or 9 other breweries since that point. The beer that you got on tap right there today is actually brewed in Canada, and it's owned by a Chinese conglomerate. And by the way, it's got the same profile as all the other 4 beers. And he still held on to his tap handle. After about 3 or 4 weeks, he caved. We put our beer on, and it stayed there for 15 years. And people loved the beer, and we started to change hearts and minds. But it was that indifference, in a sort of farm to fork environment that we live in now. If any of you guys started a brewery tomorrow, you'd have a line of people up outside your garage saying, "Hey, can I have some of that?" When we started, that just wasn't part of the issue. So that was our big issue. But like all entrepreneurs, we'd sort of stood in front of our tanks with our arms folded, and the newspaper had said, brothers-in-law start a brewery. We sort of publicly shamed ourselves. We had to succeed. We couldn't back out. And so, like many brewers at the time, we all sort of went to work on telling our stories. At the time, there were probably no more than 400 or 500 breweries in America. Today, there's 8,000, just to give you an idea of the arc of that evolution. And we all just, we went to county fairs, we went to, the Taste of Santa Barbara, we went to rodeos, and we told our stories about what we were trying to do. And I think, to me, the seminal point that broke the back of the problem was ultimately, I'd like to think it was us, and without question, in our small world, we did what we could. But ultimately, it was strength in numbers, because all 400 or 500 breweries out there were doing the same thing, and that grew to 1,000. It grew to another 1,000, and before we knew it, we were sort of a mob. We were truly a revolution, and we then started to come together. And there was this concept of esprit de corps, and it became more than just what we stood for as individual brewers. It's what we stood for collectively as a cohort within brewing, what we stood against. We created associations, we created guilds, we grew together as an industry. And probably part of the biggest journey for me with the brewery, other than creating all these great friends at the breweries, I created all these great other friends who started breweries. And I'm sure the American wine industry went through the same arc. In the mid 70s, I hear that the #1 selling wine in America was Ripple. Today we have 1,000 wines available to us within a mile of here. So it's an interesting arc that we went through, and that in turn gave us the momentum that we needed to ultimately succeed. Today we, as I said, today there's close to 9,000 breweries. I think there's going to be a lot more. I mean, there's 12,000 wineries, and they're constrained by climate. So you got to think there's going to be a lot more breweries. There's a brewery within about 10 miles of most communities. I mean, today you can pretty much start a brewery off Amazon. I mean, everything is right there in size and shape, and they're opening at a rate of about 1 to 2 a day around the nation. And craft beer, which is sort of the genie's out of the bottle. I mean, we produce about 15% of the beer drunk in America. We employ about 50% of the people engaged in the process of brewing beer. So you've got all of those people telling their stories, coming home to their friends, their family, and that slowly but surely continues to spiral and keeps everything super healthy. It's a very simple story as far as a craft brewer. First of all, drink local and regional. If you're gonna drink anything, it might be nice to know where it came from. The second thing is, if you're worried about your carbon footprint, think about the brain damage to move a beer from Amsterdam to your fridge and keep it cold versus buying a beer just as good an hour down the road. That's to me is mind-boggling how people don't sort of get that. And then finally, as brewers, we're sort of magnificently inefficient. We're jobs machines. Like I said, we employ half the people in the industry brewing beer. So great reasons to support regional local beers. So that's our story, and really it reflects the story of craft brewers around America. We all sort of grew up together. And now we've sort of created this, we're now fifth largest craft brewer in America. And which is extraordinary. We shattered our wildest dreams. And really, we sell 80% of our beer in California, which is even more extraordinary. But out of those 9,000 brewers, 99% of them are actually quite small. And that in itself is a brilliant model, because that's a model that is really super hard to compete with. I mean, consider the small brewer who owns his brewery or her brewery. They conceive the beer, they might even brew it. They then serve it to you across the counter. They might even know you or date your sister. The consumer relationship is just unimpeachable. I mean, you can't get between the consumer and the brewer. Not even the big brewers giving it away can do that. And that model is quite profitable for the brewer, the small brewer. Once they start to distribute and go into production and try and get it in retail, then it becomes a very different kettle of fish. But just from a local dairy, local bakery standpoint, the model works and it'll continue to flourish. So that's craft beer, super healthy. It's a struggle, like all. What I mean by it's a struggle is you have to stay super engaged. It's hard work. It's a lifestyle. It's 7 days a week. People who work in our world are very passionate about it. They could all probably get paid a lot more and work in other industries. But it's a great place, and what I like to call a noble profession. So that's the story of craft beer. In terms of our story for the whiz bang biz guys here, it was it really was it was sort of a journey that we never planned, but obviously we figured out as we went. And
one question I have for
yeah.
you at the very beginning, David. So,
Yeah.
and it's a question we get a lot from our founders, our
Yeah.
startup founders. Is
Yeah.
you had your day jobs. This was a side hustle for a while. When did you jump ship? Like what was the final nudge that you needed to make that jump? I think a lot of founders struggle with that, is like, when should I just go all in, and that fear of going all in and the timing and
good question. And how about I answer it within the arc of our journey? So so year one, we start our brewery, we brew about 800-900 barrels of beer. Barrel of beer is 31 gallons. For argument's sake, it's 14-15 cases of beer. So that was our first year, and you know, we were losing money right out of the gate. Within 5 years, we'd got to about 10,000 barrels. So we'd reached our dream. We'd done everything we wanted to. We were still losing money. So, you know, obviously we're not jumping into into something that we can't sort of afford. So we continue with our day jobs.
So for 5 years, you still had,
at least,
oh, wow.
absolutely, yeah,
Okay.
absolutely. And then from 5 to 10, we really started to feel some growth. So we went from 10,000 barrels to 50,000 barrels. So now we've got a real enterprise. It's reckless not to be engaged with it full time, because we're employing people. We got revenues of about $10 million. We've got debts everywhere. So at that point, we start to make our shift. And it's sort of 10
years in.
No, it was sort of midpoint.
Okay,
midpoint.
okay.
So we then start to make our shift. And, you know, a lot of it is, you know, it's what you want to do. You have all these competing factors in your life. You might even have better opportunities in the life that you're coming out of. And certainly in our cases, we were running sort of robust enterprises in our old lives, but our hearts were elsewhere. And so, you know, you got this heart and head thing going on. But ultimately, one of the factors that comes into that thing is you create something. And just coming back to that point, it becomes reckless to ignore it. You know, creating a sizable business in the state of California is a responsibility. You have an obligation to the business, you have an obligation to staff, you have an obligation to banks. And it's, you know, you take on a certain amount of responsibility when you create these businesses, and you're exposed. So you've got to be engaged, they've got to be healthy, they've got to be well run, and they've got to be all today. So really that ended up being sort of one of the heaviest weighing issues. So now we're in year 10, 50,000 barrels. It's about a $10 million business. And we go from year 10 to year 15, we grow from 50 to 100,000 barrels. So we double our scale. Remember, a capital intensive business, you know, beer isn't digital. You need vessels actually to ferment and condition the beer. You've all seen the brewery down the road. It's like a giant June bug. You sort of drive by, well, how did that happen? So, you know, we've got an enterprise that is growing and is actually beginning to sort of fund its growth. It can pay its taxes. I mean, we were paying our taxes. We have to borrow to pay our taxes. But it's able to sort of cash flow itself and stay healthy. And then year 15, and this is nothing more than serendipity. I'd like to say it was somewhat contrived and brilliant, but it's serendipity. We dreamed up a brand called 805. And we went from year 15, went from 100,000 barrels to 400,000 barrels in 5 years. So we quadrupled our size of what we thought was an enormous brewery in the first place. And that was a journey in, insanity really to get there. And during that point, I mean, we looked at in order to basically keep up with the growth, and we're growing at 35 to 40% a year at that point, is how do we get there? And as my partner and I had always kept the company pretty close. We didn't want partners. We irritated each other enough to add another partner. We just couldn't conceive what that would be like. So we wanted to be able to control our discussions, control our growth, fulfill our sort of vision of the business without someone else sort of tapping us on the shoulder. But we knew once we hit that point, we needed to raise about $70-80 million in order to manage the growth that we were seeing. So, you know, we'd obviously shaken down all the high street banks and all the banks that we could that have been with us for dutifully for 15 years, and they were like, "Have a good time, guys. We're out," because you know we sort of defied their covenants in terms of where we wanted to go, so obviously we had to go out and look for investment, and that process was not something. I mean, we were pretty naive to that, what I mean by naive, I mean we both had business, we both sold businesses, we both understood the process, but we didn't really know how it worked within our space. And very quickly, obviously, the big international brewers got a sniff of what was going on, and you know their model is pretty simple. It's buy the brewery, we eliminate its costs, we capture the brand's magic, we make it at half the price, and we move on to the next. And I mean, it's not as mercenary as that. But ultimately, those are the mechanics. And so they're able to offer a huge amount of money. I mean, eye-watering offers for the brewery as a whole. And, you know, ultimately, you know, we sort of dwelt on it whimsically for a little bit, but we realized that's not what we wanted, because essentially, you know, what we just spent 20 years building would have sort of drifted away quite quickly. And so we then went to look at venture capital, and you know that too was sort of weird in as much as you know the VCs were like, okay, we can give you the money, we can help you manage the business, and then we're going to sell it to the guys you just said no to. And it was a little like, so why would we spend 7 years in a boardroom with you getting irritated only to sell it to them when we could have done that now? So that sort of obviously didn't work. And then we sort of sat on our hands for a little bit, and eventually we tracked down a small family-owned brewery in Belgium called Duvel Moortgat. They've been around for 150 years. They were about twice our size. They were family-run, so they understood the sort of gestalt of family businesses. They'd successfully moved it from generation to generation. They talked about a 100-year business plan. We had a generational vision for the business, and you know we have the Nextgen already in the business, and so there was a lot of reasons why they were the perfect partner for us, and we sold the majority of the company. My partner and I still own a material chunk of it, enough that it's the highest and best use of our time and our family's time for a long time, and you know they carried the burden of close to $100 million worth of capital input that we've had into the business over the last 6-7 years. The great thing about them in terms of an acquirer is, you know, I think they've been to Paso Robles 10 days in 7 years. I go to Belgium once a year, and they're not operators, they're investors, intelligent investors. But we don't have arguments over you know, investing in equipment that brewers understand. We don't have arguments over franchise law and what is it. We don't have arguments over brand life cycles of beers, because it's sort of reflexive to it. You know, they understand it. So
that speaks volumes to finding the right investor
for
your business.
It's absolutely. I mean, unless literally you want to cut and run. Yeah. If we wanted to cut and run, we should, you know, we should have sold the brewery to someone like Anheuser-Busch, but who I'm sure would have blown it up into a, you know, quite an enterprise. But the brewery wouldn't have been expanded. I mean, you know, we employ 600 people now. There probably would be 100 there now. We sit on 80 acres. When we first showed up in Paso Robles, our brewery was sat on a quarter of acre. About 60% of the energy that we generate at the brewery is generated in our 10-acre solar array on those 60 acres behind us. This time next year, we're going to add another 8 acres. This time next year, we'll generate 100% of our energy from solar. So we'll be We won't be carbon neutral, but we're pretty close to it. And so we can do all those things that you sort of dream of as a business owner. And we have, we employ 600. I'd say we have 600 friends. It's a great way to make friends, start a business.
Can you talk to you talked about Nextgen. So how did that process go? Are they your kids? Are they?
Yeah, my
Adam's
partner's
kids?
son, Nick Firestone, he's now my COO.
How old's Nick?
He's mid-30s. He's sort of Marine Corps guy, did his stint in Afghanistan, came back, worked as in a consulting firm in San Francisco, got paid way too much money, completely spoiled him. And then over a couple of long dinners, I sort of talked him into joining the circus. And he always had he liked to make his own bread and stuff like that. So I always knew there was someone inside there who could. And then I had my daughter who works in Venice. We have 3 locations. We've got one up here in Paso. We have the location in Santa Ynez Valley where we do a lot of sort of complex fermentation. And then we have a small brewery in Venice Beach, Los Angeles. We call it the Propagator. And the whole idea is it propagates ideas. We're brewing new beers there all the time. And we have some of our marketing staff up here, but it got so hard to get the sort of marketing staff we needed at the price we could afford to pay. It was all in LA. So we moved a whole good chunk of our marketing office down to Venice. So our CMO's there, our head of our director, creative director.
They're in LA, but you have a very Central Coast brand. It's very Central Coast focused, the whole surfing vibe, the whole
bingo. Well, it is, without question, it is.
They're able to, being in LA, they still understand that.
We do. We have our 805 brand manager is based here, and our art director for 805 is based here. But you got to remember, we sell more 805 in San Diego than we sell up in this area. We sell more 805 in Arizona. Wow. It's a lifestyle that is it's obviously represents an area. We like to say everybody in this area is sort of a wannabe cowboy surfer, and that, as long as we're sort of staying within those guardrails, we're talking people's language. But it's a California lifestyle, and it's proven to be that, which is one of the reasons it's the #1 craft beer in California. But yeah, point being is Venice has become sort of the marketing hub. And, marketing used to be designing tap handles, but now it's digital, it's media, it's analytics, it's endless graphics, endless films, content. It's a fantastic world that I would have never dreamed that we would have ever been able to afford. But so that's based down there. She works down there, my daughter, and so yeah. We're slowly sort of putting the pieces together, and then there's sort of Nextgen within the leadership team of the brewery, and that's helpful too. So
that's great.
Yeah.
So just quick pause. Any questions from the audience? Yeah, please jump in.
You make great beer. There's a lot of great beer in this country. Your marketing 805, I've been all over the country. I see 805 everywhere. That mark was that. Did you think forward on that? Did you just test it out? Like, I will try this and see where it goes. It's blown up. Congratulations on that. Amazing.
So it was actually a little bit of an epiphany, in as much as so 805 was an epiphany in a lot of ways. It was a beer. It wasn't very complex beer for us to make. We sort of wrung our hands over making these complex, high ABV, high hop, barrel-aged beers for years. And we used to make a blonde ale as a shift beer for the brewers. And we made it available for our events and so forth. And we even had some local pubs who pour it as their private label beer. And we noticed it was a real crowd pleaser. And there's a lot of P.T. Barnum in the beer business amongst brewers. Once they get on the streets, they all start throwing punches, and it's fine. All is fair in love and war. And so a lot of the small local brewers in the area were like, those guys are too big. They're not local, have my beer. And so we said, okay, we need a response. So what had happened is, I think in the mid 2010s, AB had come through the west coast of America and trademarked all the area codes. They didn't trademark the 805. So we trademarked it, and we knew we sort of had it, and we used it and sustained the trademark. And so I said, okay, let's put that 805 on that blonde ale. I mean, it was that simple. And we noticed we got 5 to 10 times rate of sale. And then we said, okay, so this is sort of interesting. This is a beautiful beer, but it's not a craft story. And so we actually went and hired this great kid out of Vulcan, who had moved back up here. He went to Templeton High. We said, look, we want you to tell the story of 805 as you remember it. And he was an ex-pro surfer, so it was like, sure, dude, I'll do that. And he just started to tell that story. And we in some ways we separated it. We didn't take it to beer events. We didn't talk about it. I mean, if you went to the Invitational this week and right here, 5,000 beer lovers, tickets sell out in less than 2 minutes. Arguably one of the best beer festivals in the world amongst craft beer community. 805 wasn't poured. So we somewhat separated it. And because of that, we realized, oh, okay, there's this whole community out there who drink beer for brand. And so maybe if you can match great quality beer that when you open up the box and look inside, there's a story. It's not conceived out of Madison Avenue. You pull out 805 and then there's David Walker and Adam Firestone, and there's Paso Robles, and then there's, this thing goes on and on and on. It's real. And that's what really happens, the brand. And it became very, very, it became somewhat viral. I mean, we went county by county. People would literally bootleg it out of counties. Like a lot of brands, I think that's the way it happens.
Do you have presence overseas?
We don't really. I mean, it's
is that something?
Not really. I mean, we do have a presence overseas to protect our trademark. It's the weirdest deal, as you know. If you don't operate in a market, you can't protect your trademark. So Australia, there was a Firestone Walker Brewing Company. Firestone opened one day. And so we had to get our beer to Australia pretty quickly so we could challenge our trademark. So there is that element. I'm from Britain, so I had my beer there for a while just so I could drink it. But, beer is perishable. It's heavy. If you've got a palate for great beer, you don't want it 200 days old. Producing beer in a modern world is really moving towards a regional process. I can't articulate how the big brewers are going to survive, but I'm much more confident protecting my model than sitting in the boardroom of Heineken. How you make your beer relevant in America 50 years from now, best of luck, mate. I mean, it's as regional brewers get more, they get bigger, they can provide beer at just as good, the same costs, nice branding that resonates with people. Best of luck being an international brand. I mean, yeah.
That's a great vision, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not because you're Goliath that you're going to win in long term. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Any questions in the chat? Okay. Yes, please.
Looking back, knowing what you know now, if you had the chance to do anything differently, what would you do?
Well, on a technical level, I'd probably self-distribute. I'd probably create my own distribution company and distribute within probably 50 miles of the brewery. But I mean, that's because I could have a closer relationship with my consumers. And it's actually quite valuable. I mean, you can build real equity value. So from a technical standpoint, other than that, there's a million things we'd have done differently. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we just kept walking into walls all the time because we'd gone down the wrong road. I mean, I don't know where to begin or what I would do differently, because we would. But I do know that we had a vision for things. We sum up our sort of philosophy with this thing called beer before glory, and we always felt that the beer was what we set out to elevate. We didn't want to, there's a lot of craft brewers out there who sort of attach their beer to other things. They might want to tell a story about sustainability. They might have wanted to tell a story about hating the big brewers. They might have wanted to tell a story about, I don't know, anything. We felt that we needed to tell a story about beer. I mean, we'd sort of come out of the wine tradition, and it was sort of, this sort of reverence for the artisanal thing that you're actually doing. And so to us, coming back to that was really important. Whenever we'd have an argument over anything, it was like, how does this impact the beer? And so we did distill down very quickly a notion of what we were trying to achieve. And that kept us on track. Every time we'd screw up, it would sort of move us. So.
There's another question. Yeah, go for it.
So you've been through a lot of interviews, I'm sure, been asked a lot of questions. What's one question you haven't been asked that you would like people to ask you?
So I'm going to repeat it for the
Yeah.
people online. So a question you've never been asked that you wish people would ask you. It's a hard one.
Wow. It's actually a good question. I just don't know whether I can give you a good answer. How hard I worked over the last 25 years. I mean, I'm serious. I mean, how hard you work to build an enterprise from scratch is, it's really, 25 years ago, I would have said to people, start your own business, have your own destiny. And now I meet kids out of university, I say, you should go run that business over there that they've been running for 100 years. You just do it better. You'll have your weekends. You'll probably get richer. You'll have a bigger platform to develop your ideas on. So I would say that, I think the hardest thing is the sacrifices that you make to build an enterprise. But in some ways, it's a little bit like a dog with a bone. You're so into it, you just can't put it down. And you just got to be aware that comes at a price. Thankfully, I still have a great family. Thankfully, we all sort of hung in there, and so does my partner. But I'd say partners are good. Partners are very good. I mean, they're a problem to, obviously they're a problem when you disagree, but, you want to disagree. You want 1 + 1 = 3. And so having a partner, you can, when you have those dark moments, they're having lighter moments, and vice versa if you're in sync with each other. So sort of interesting. I went to a similar thing to this in the Central Valley the other day, and there was this guru talking about startups, and he said, don't invest in startups where the partners are too connected. Related.
Yeah. A lot of seasoned investors, if they see any two family brothers, ties, they're like, nope, not gonna happen.
You need to be really different.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't know whether I answered.
So you're the exception to the rule.
Yeah. Well, we're different. I mean, we're different. The very different.
What are the different strengths? Okay, so let's start with this, and we'll do the next question.
Okay.
But what are the different strengths and weaknesses between you and Adam?
Well, I'm like a long-haired Englishman from England, and he was born in California, and sort of buttoned down Marine Corps, all business, and so we have a bit of both. We see the we come at the world culturally very different. I think that helps. There's a lot of differences. I'll protect our confidentiality by not going into them.
Okay, so from the chat, from a marketing standpoint, how do you see the brand evolving? We know you focus on producing fresh content and telling new stories and experiences. What is your marketing team doing?
It's the marketing question.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, they're highly professional, well-trained, experienced individuals. They see the world in very analytical and creative ways. You can't. It's sort of weird. I only had this discussion yesterday with my CMO in Venice about investing in his side of the business. It's because it's so difficult to measure it, to draw a nexus between return and there's a lot of feel in it, but there's a lot of investing, there's a lot of courage in building a world-class marketing department. I mean, you evolve as a business. I mean, when all we did was affect the world 100 miles around us, it's very experiential. Anders used to work with us, and he sort of ran teams of events folks who would engage people literally hand on hand. But as you start growing, you have to, you have a different set of challenges. So, I would, in order to answer that question, I would just say, just because you can cook doesn't mean you can run a restaurant. And what I would say is, just because you've got great ideas doesn't mean you can run a marketing department. It's a highly evolved discipline that it's one of the few areas of the business where it's hard to just sort of throw someone in and develop them. They have to have been there. They have to have run a big budget. They have to understand how media impacts. They have to understand a lot of the things that go into great marketing. That answer the question?
Okay. We'll start here and then Corey. Yeah.
So you talked about, well, first, let me just say thank you for telling your story honestly, because I feel like 5 years in, keep going. I'm so happy about this, right?
Yeah.
And it feels like you're purpose driven without even saying that, right? You
know
what that is.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you talked about your esprit de corps and your family of employees that work for you. How do you keep that up with your team? How do you infuse that esprit de corps with them in a way that makes them show up every morning as excited to be there as you are?
Well, it's super intentional. It's a great point. In the old days, literally, you couldn't help but bump into people and say, "Hey, happy birthday," because you knew it was their birthday. When you got 600 people, you don't know it's their birthday. First of all, you obviously engender a sense of culture within your leadership teams. Obviously not overloading direct reports, making sure that the managers are given the time, the energy, and the resources to be able to truly develop their people. We actually talk about intentional. About 7 years ago, I actually developed a department called Cultivation, and put someone in charge of it, gave them a budget, and said, spend this money and keep people smiling. And so it was flowers when someone had a baby. It was flowers when there was commiseration. It was sending an ice cream truck to the brewery when it was 101 degrees and we were brewing our tails off. It was gift cards. It was all of the things that's little things that make a huge difference. So my answer to that question is, once it moves beyond you, you have to make it intentional. It becomes a discipline. And trust me, we're not great at it. I mean, when you look at companies like Google, and they've developed it into a massive art form. And I'm not suggesting they have a better culture than we do, but I'm suggesting that you're up against huge stakes certainly in a modern business on connecting with people. You've got all of the issues built around just managing an employee now, whether it's vacation, whether it's mental health, whether it's I want to work from home 2 days a week, whether it's I want to come at 11, whether it's I want my dog under my desk. All of those things feed into culture, and it's a big issue. Head of HR is super important.
get another question. Yes.
I was curious from both a PR and operational aspect, how you deal with obstacles or challenges such as water.
Water is obviously a huge issue for any business in California. Sustainability has always been part of a brewer's table stakes. You know, brewers have been brewing for millennia. Raw materials, water, and energy have always been hard to find, and they've been expensive. You have to pay for them. So they've developed systems. Brewers have developed systems over centuries that sort of minimize the impact that they have on those elements. Okay, so that's the first thing I'd say. Certainly in our case, you know, we work very hard, obviously, on water reuse. You know, we kick off, you know, 100,000 gallons of wastewater in a given period. We have wastewater treatment that is monitored heavily, but it's right next to the cities, actually. It's monitored heavily by the cities, and it goes back right to the city. And so we have a very good relationship with our municipality. One of the reasons we're in this area is that we, you know, when we came here 20 years ago, we knew we were speaking to a municipality that sort of understood wineries and agriculture and that sort of stuff. So from a brewer standpoint, it's super important for us to be efficient. Number one, we pay for our water. Number two, we pay for the water we give back to the city, even though we give it back pretty well much potable. And so it's to a certain extent, there's a real tax on using it. You know, we're very, very, very engaged in that. And the city is very engaged with us. In terms of the general understanding of water, there's water and then there's the politics of water, as you know. And there's this sort of like, who's using the water? And, you know, for a while, I was the president of the California Craft Brewers Association. And the folks there used to give me sort of these talking points when I get hit on questions about water. And one of the things they said to me, which I found was fascinating. They said that if you took all of the craft brewers in the state of California, all of them, from Sierra Nevada down to Barrel House, it's 1,000 of them, and you worked out how much water they used, it would be less than one 600-acre almond orchard in the Central Valley. So it's, you know, it's all about perception, and it's all about how water's used, who's using it. But without question, we use more water than this place. How efficiently, I don't know. I don't know who's measuring that, but it's a huge issue for us, and we're very, very, very engaged with that process. You know, my dream would be to land apply our water on the 60 odd acres we have, and grow hops and barley that we rotate back into the system, and we're a complete sort of virtuous cycle in terms of how we use our, you know, how we generate energy, how we generate raw materials. But that it's a little bit of a pipe dream, because farming is not that simple, as you probably know. But it's a great question, and it's right at the top of our priorities. But you can't afford to waste water as a brewer.
So we had, go ahead.
So a question, you was talking about challenges. COVID hit, you sell a certain amount of beer in bars, put in kegs. That business pretty much overnight disappeared.
Yeah.
Now you need to put beer in cans.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, aluminum prices will skyrocket.
Yeah. Well,
I think, yeah, and I'll repeat the question because the mic's here. So, so question about, you know, how did you manage COVID? No more kegs, more cans. Price of aluminum has gone up.
Yeah.
How did you navigate that?
So COVID is a real issue. I mean, we obviously, about 38% of our beer was sold in bars prior to COVID, end of 2019. March 2020, all the bars closes. So that was a huge issue for a lot of people. First of all, you got thousands of kegs out there full of beer, sitting in bars, sitting in wholesalers, and so the brewers had to take that back, take it in the shorts. So that was the first issue. The second issue is then we had to pivot to the opportunity. The opportunity was obviously in grocery stores. Obviously our grocery store business increased significantly. It didn't cover the 30%, but it got a long way to getting there. And that was sort of a giddy time for us. I remember when COVID hit in the April, May, June, July, we were all out in the market talking to the grocers. We were all masked up. We all had gloves on, spraying hand sanitizers everywhere. We had parts of the brewery making hand sanitizer, and no one knew what the hell this thing was. And I remember feeling extraordinarily sort of motivated by this sort of team effort, from essential food to grocery and to everybody sort of working hard so that the people weren't going crazy trying to deal with it. So that was an issue. But ultimately, if you look at the world aluminum supply, it's like anything, it's sort of on a just-in-time basis. So if you increase the use of aluminum by whatever it was, who knows, 10, 15%, because everybody moved to aluminum, then you're going to have allocation issues. And then compound that with Russia, that generates about 80% of the world's aluminum, Russia and Ukraine, then you have a big problem. And our aluminum prices went up 35%. Wow. It's very hard for us to manage. I mean, our biggest issue at the moment is managing inflation. I mean, we've revised our margin expectations certainly for the next 2 years, knowing full well that we have real issues with supply chain.
I think that's it for now. We're past time, but thank you so much, David.
Thank you very much.
So
great questions. Appreciate
it. Thank you so much. A couple more plugins before we leave. So our next coffee and conversation, Kiki Wilkinson will be here. She started her own business recently, Thrive Mind Collaborative. She's an early stage Airbnb employee. She's had a really interesting trajectory in a tech startup that obviously became huge, and now is running her own business here locally on the Central Coast. So we're really excited to have her tell her story. And then let's see, we have a workshop coming up on manufacturing. So Dr. Ahmed Dief is an absolute expert in process improvement. He's a Lean Six Sigma trained. He's an absolutely, he comes from Michigan, from industry, was in the car industry, was an absolute god up over there in the manufacturing world. So he helps a lot of our food and beverage clients, anyone who's actually making product, and also actually just general process improvement and process efficiencies. He's an expert. So don't miss that talk or that workshop. I think it's a 3-hour workshop, so pretty deep dive into what might be affecting your businesses if that's what you're doing. So that's what's coming up in the next month. We have events like these every single month, so stay tuned, sign up as clients. If you're not clients, we're happy to help in any way we can. Thank you for showing up this morning. Thank you.